Hi everyone, Miss Hannon here. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about two of the most important chemical reactions on planet Earth. The only reason why life exists on this planet is because organisms have developed a way to capture and store energy. Because all organisms need energy to survive, to power life's processes, and so these are the ways that organisms can do that. So there's two basic life forms on Earth, right? And all depend on energy. So they use energy in different ways. So there are autotrophs, which are organisms that make their own food for energy by using energy from the sun or energy from chemicals deep in the ocean. So these are your plants, algae, and some chemosynthetic bacteria if we're talking about deep down in the bottom of the ocean. We're going to focus on plants and photosynthesis in this video in our biology class. So autotrophs make their own food. They don't need to eat, right? So if you think auto, they do it automatically. They automatically make their own food. They don't need to eat to survive, right? Whereas heterotrophs are organisms that need to eat to get energy, right? We can't just sit out in the sun and get enough energy for the day, right? We need to eat food. We need to eat breakfast, lunch, dinner. So autotrophs get energy through a process called photosynthesis. Photosynthesis. We are using photons from the sun and synthesizing sugars out of that energy. So we're using light energy to make sugars, glucose in particular, starches. So the plants and algae are doing this process, making their own food, their own sugars. Then they can break down those sugars in a process called cellular respiration to make energy, ATP energy. Heterotrophs, on the other hand, like animals, humans are a type of animals, fungi, certain protists, some bacteria, anything that needs to eat food to get energy to survive is a heterotroph. These organisms use a process called cellular respiration, which essentially just breaks down those sugars that were created by this process over here to make energy, ATP. So animals and fungi, heterotrophs use this pathway where we are eating sugars, eating molecules, breaking those molecules down for energy. Autotrophs use this other pathway where they create their own food and then break that food down to create energy, ATP. And ATP is the thing that we're going for here, that main energy molecule that all cells need to power their whatever reactions are happening inside of that cell. So whatever processes need energy, that's where we're getting the energy from. Let's start with photosynthesis, the first process that we're going to focus on. Photosynthesis is the process that uses light energy from the sun to convert water and carbon dioxide into energy-rich sugars and oxygen. Okay, so this is, I'll show you the equation for this process in a second, but this is kind of the equation in words. So the plants are collecting energy from the sun. They're collecting carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So there's little pores in the leaves where the carbon dioxide can be absorbed. And they're also absorbing water, right, from their roots. They're taking in water from their roots from the soil. So those are the things going into the plant. And the plant is using those three things, those three reactants, to make sugars, like glucose, starch. And then oxygen is just a waste product that is released from the leaves into the atmosphere. Luckily for us, because that's what we breathe. All right, so if we were going to put this into a chemical equation, this is what it would look like. So we've got carbon dioxide plus water, H2O is water. Here's your chemical reaction here. So usually sunlight is shown over the arrow in this chemical reaction just to show that that's the energy that's powering the reaction. And we are creating, well, not we, the plants are creating oxygen and sugar or glucose. So those are the products, okay? And if you look closely, what I would like you to pay attention to is the numbers here, right? This is a balanced equation. On planet Earth, atoms are never created or lost. They are just recycled and transferred. So the reactants here, the things that are going in, we've got 6 carbons on this side of the equation. We've got 6 carbons on this side of the equation, right? We're not making anything new here. We're just rearranging the atoms into different molecules. I keep saying we, not we. The plants are doing this. We've got 6 times 2 oxygens, so that's 12, plus 6 more, right? So that's 18. So we've got 6 times 2 plus 6 more on this side. Okay, so again, we're not gaining or losing any oxygens. We're just rearranging the atoms into a different form. Okay, that's really important to pay attention to. Okay, and again, remember the things that go into an equation are called reactants. Those are the things that are needed. So these are the things going into the plant, right? The plant is taking in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, water from the soil, and converting those into oxygen and glucose, sugar. All of this takes place inside the chloroplast. Really important organelle inside of plant cells, little green guy, right? You can see them under the microscope here, colored green. They have little stacks on the inside that look like little green pancakes. Those are called thylakoids. The stroma is the area around those. We're not going to go into all that in this class. Maybe if you take a more advanced biology class, you might get into the parts of the chloroplast and what each of them do. But today we're just going to focus on the fact that the chloroplast is where all of this happens. So it's the organelle in plant cells that carry out photosynthesis. They contain something called chlorophyll, which is just a pigment that makes them green that's absorbing the sunlight. It's just a pigment coloration that absorbs the sunlight to help power this process of photosynthesis. All right, so if we look closely, this is kind of a zoomed in version of the chloroplast here. So we've got light coming in, water coming in, and carbon dioxide coming in, right? Remember, those are our reactants. Carbon dioxide, water, sunlight. There's a lot of chemical reactions that are going on. Again, in this class, we're not going to go into detail about exactly how all of this is happening. If you take a more advanced biology class, you might. Let's just focus on the basics. What's going in and what's coming out. We got water, carbon dioxide going in, a lot of chemical reactions happening, oxygen and sugars are being produced. Okay, that's it. So the sugars created in this process are stored as starches, like cellulose, which we've learned about, which allow the plant to grow tall, to produce seeds, fruits, and vegetables. Okay, so the structures of the plant that the plant is actually made of are made of those starches and sugars and glucose that the plant is making through this process, which is amazing. So this is how the plant grows. It needs water, it needs carbon dioxide, and it needs light to grow, to make those sugars. So when you're eating those delicious apples, those fruits, vegetables, seeds, they're all the stored energy form of sugar, right? The plant is, the reason why all of this is happening is because we're harnessing energy from the sun, storing it as sugar. The plant is gonna use those sugars to then make its own energy, make ATP. And I'll show you how in a second. All right, so unlike plants that can make their own energy from sunlight, or make their own food from sunlight, essentially, heterotrophs get energy by eating, right? By eating food. So the grass harnesses the energy from the sun, stores it as carbohydrates. It can use those carbohydrates itself, so it doesn't need to eat, makes its own food. But the rabbit and the fox aren't doing that, right? Those animals need to eat to get energy. So the rabbit is eating the energy that's stored in the grass. Then it stores that energy in its own cells. The fox eats the rabbit, gets the energy from the rabbit. Okay, so it's a little cycle, a food chain. Food molecules contain energy that is released when chemical bonds are broken during enzyme-catalyzed reactions. And we'll take a look at that reaction in a second. But the energy comes from the chemical bonds being broken. That's essentially all that's happening. The energy in a food, energy stored in food is called a calorie. So the more calories a food has, the more energy molecules are stored in that food. And if you recall from our last unit, ATP is that form of energy. Adenosine triphosphate is the form of energy that can be used by cells. Right? We've got an adenine and 3 phosphates, right? Triphosphate. Tri means 3. So how do we get energy from ATP? By breaking the high energy bonds between the last 2 phosphates. So these phosphates are held together kind of like a spring, right? When you push a spring together, that takes a lot of energy, a lot of oomph, and then when it's released, right, that energy gets released. Same thing is happening here. So when we break that bond, that last phosphate kind of explodes off, makes a little spark of energy, which is the energy that powers all of the necessary functions of a cell, right? When a cell needs energy, this is what it's doing to get that energy, most likely. ATP, it's breaking that phosphate. Now, how do we make ATP? All right, so we know the plants store the energy as glucose, carbohydrates, and now how do we get it out? So what cells can do is something called cellular respiration. So this is the process that releases the energy from food in the presence of oxygen. So we're making ATP from that glucose molecule. Animals do this, plants do this, all life on Earth does this. All right, so if we look at an equation for this, we've got oxygen and glucose going in. And if you think about yourself, right, you're breathing in oxygen, right? That's how we're getting oxygen into our cells. We're eating glucose, right? So these are the things going into our bodies to make us function. We can't survive without oxygen and glucose, air and food, right? We need those things. And then what do we produce? We produce carbon dioxide, right? You've heard that you exhale carbon dioxide. Water, which is another waste product. These are 2 waste products. Water comes out in your sweat, in your breath, in your pee, right? We're always getting rid of excess water. And energy is the thing that we're really making that our body cares about. So these 2 are waste products, and the energy molecule, or attaching that 3rd phosphate to the ADP molecule to make ATP energy. Okay, so again, reactants and products. And again, look closely. You can see this equation is balanced. We've got 6 carbons here. We've got 6 carbons here. We're not adding or taking away carbons. This isn't magic here. Carbons aren't appearing out of thin air. All that's happening here is our cells are rearranging these atoms to form new molecules. So we're breaking down these and putting them back together in different ways so that we can create this ATP molecule, which is what our cells need to power all of their functions. Okay, so there's 3 steps of cellular respiration. We're not going to go into super detail with these. I just want to briefly talk about them so you hear the words. The first step is called glycolysis. Glycolysis, lysis is to break. So we're breaking the glucose essentially. Produces only a small amount of energy, so we get a little bit of energy from that. And then during the Krebs cycle, which happens inside the mitochondria here, a little more energy gets released by further breaking down glucose. And again, there's a lot of chemical reactions that happen here. I took a whole course in college that goes over this whole thing. You don't need to know that for this class. Just know the words. And then at the end, something called the electron transport chain, which produces the bulk of the energy ATP in cellular respiration. Okay, so we get a lot of ATP molecules just from breaking down one single glucose molecule, which is pretty awesome. And again, this all takes place inside that magical mitochondria that you all told me is the powerhouse of the cell. All right, so if you haven't noticed, the plants and animals on this planet keep each other in balance, right? So the plant stores energy from the sun. So we get it, store it as carbohydrates. Heterotrophs can eat those carbohydrates, release